Sekeres Price from Wall Center. Today's Bodog poll question. Lots of big names available on the trade market. Do you want the Canucks to acquire one? We'll put that to Jeff Paterson here in a second. Bodog, your source for casino games, poker strategy, and sports odds. Bodog, line of the day from me. Canada, Guadalupe tomorrow at the Gold Cup. The Canadians are huge favorites. You can't just bet them on the money line. Canada to win by 3, doubles your money on the Bodog line of the day. Here he is, our Canucks reporter, one half of the Rink by Duo with Andrew Wadden. Sat in for me Friday. Thank you, Jeff Paterson. And it's draft and free agency week, my friend. Very exciting time.
Indeed it is. Let the games begin, or whatever we consider the games. I guess they've already started. We've seen a little bit of trade activity, saw a little more over the weekend, and now that all the teams have converged on Music City, let's hope that that's the theme for the week and that we all have lots to talk about.
But we also got a lesson, didn't we, on how difficult some of these things can be sometimes. Like, there's been snags left, right, and center for a lot of teams, running up against no trade clauses, running up against weird CBA clauses. It's one thing to say, hey, the Canucks should go do X. It's not always easy to execute, apparently.
No, I saw the ramifications of the Tony DeAngelo deal in Carolina, and I guess Torrey Krug. Look, you negotiate trade protection for a reason, and there are some that are trying to figure out whether this is about wanting to play for a contender somewhere or whether this is just using trade protection to stay as far away from torts as one possibly can. So I'm not sure what's going into it. There was a suggestion that maybe Torrey Krug, in the light of day, would reconsider. But for now, certainly seems like some trade protection there. A bit of a holdup between what looked like and sounded like, as pieces were starting to leak out on Saturday, like an absolute blockbuster leading into draft week.
Yeah, and don't blame Krug for a heartbeat if he doesn't want to join a full rebuild in Philadelphia with John Tortorella on the bench. As you mentioned, that it is his prerogative after what was negotiated in. Answer me the poll, Jeff. It's a weaker free agent crop. Do you want to see the Canucks swing a big trade here, add a big name on the trade market?
I don't need them to go big game hunting here. They've already done that with Filip Hronek. Where they are, and I know that they've cleared a little cap space, obviously, with the OEL buyout. I want to see these guys use just ruthless efficiency, though, in finding bargains that are available either in free agency or via trade. I want, for the first time in my life, to see the Vancouver Canucks demonstrate that they understand the concept of weaponizing the cap space that they have. And we've gone through a couple of management groups now, and we just haven't seen it. We've seen it in reverse, obviously, where they've had to pay to make some contracts go away. But now that they've created this flexibility, I'm a little surprised. Like, they jumped right in on the first day of the buyout window to execute the OEL buyout. I kind of thought that there would be another shoe to drop shortly thereafter. I figured it was all part of a plan, and maybe it is still, but we haven't seen that second move, the accompanying move after the OEL buyout. So I don't need them getting in over their heads with a massive contract, and I know the cap is supposed to go up and all that kind of stuff. But I think for next year, if it is about just building a more solid, more robust lineup top to bottom, then I want to see them poach and I want to see them pounce on some inefficiencies in the market. And now that they've got some salary cap space to do it, that, to me, would represent a victory here over the next 7 or 8 days.
Was that Sean Durzi trade a missed opportunity? Would you have paid that price for Sean Durzi?
I'm surprised that Los Angeles parted with the player in return for a pick when it sounds like the Kings are involved in Pierre-Luc Dubois, if not other things as well. I would have thought Durzi would have been of interest to the Winnipeg Jets in return if you were going to shop that deal. So the fact that they get a draft pick, that's fine. I mean, that's draft capital that you can use as an asset. But I was a little surprised that Durzi, just a young right-handed defenseman that has NHL games under his belt now. I mean, that would be pretty attractive to just about every team around the league. So did the Canucks miss out? Look, they certainly can use help on the right side. We know that, but they don't have a second rounder, so they couldn't pay that price right there. You know, even if they got wind of the deal going down over the weekend, they didn't have the currency necessary to make that trade happen. But yeah, I mean, sure, I think Sean Durzi, I mean, it's incredible that, one time we talked about the Los Angeles Kings and all of that young talent that they had stockpiled on the back end, particularly on the right side. And I guess it tells you that they truly value Brant Clark because he's the one guy that they haven't moved off of. And I do think that they want to clear a path for him to be an everyday National Hockey Leaguer as early as next season.
Yeah, and that that pick gets the Kings into the draft. They're without a first rounder, so that gets them into 32nd in the second round here. So, sorry, no, that's the 2024 pick. My bad. But I'm with you, Jeff. A little surprised that it went for just that, particularly given the plethora of young right shot defensemen they have. I see you've asked a poll on your own with regards to how many picks the Canucks will use on Wednesday, Thursday. They own 7. Take us through that.
Yeah, and 7 is the allotted number, and just looking at their recent history, since they played playoff hockey in the bubble, there have been 3 drafts, 2020, 2021, 2022, and the Vancouver Canucks, who haven't played a playoff game since the bubble, have used a grand total of 17 picks over the last 3 drafts, which is just wild when you think of where they are and the fact that they have parted with so many picks. And last year they had a first rounder in Jonathan Karamaki. Obviously, the jury's still very much out on him, but no first rounders the years before that. So, if people, and look, every year we're all guilty of it. We have asked that question so many times. Is this the year the Canucks add draft picks ahead of a draft? Well, if you're one that believes that this is the year that it's going to happen, then you're swimming upstream here. You're going against the grain, because only twice in the last decade have the Canucks used more than the prescribed draft per round that every team has at the start of a draft cycle. So they have traded away. Everybody knows the history here, whether it was Jim Benning. We've seen it continue with this regime as well. They had a high of 9 picks one year. That was the year that they were the host, 2019, when they took Podkolzin and Höglander and Silovs, among others. And the Elias Paterson draft in 2017, they had 8 picks. So twice in the last decade have they had more than their prescribed number of picks. So history isn't on your side if you think that somehow this is the year that they're going to bulk up.
Hey, you've heard some of the names. Who do you think they will take? Like, which name makes sense for you at number 11?
Tom Lander makes an awful lot of sense just as a right shot defenseman, which obviously checks a ton of boxes for them. He's Swedish, and we know that the general manager is, and they went to Sweden last year with their first rounder. I hope that that isn't the prevailing factor of why you would select Tom Lander, but they took him out to dinner in Buffalo at the Combine, so they wined him and dined him. And, look, we all do this. You connect the dots in this business, and so I think that there is some legitimate interest there. Ryan Backer, I think, is probably off the board. I'm really curious to see it's such a forward-heavy draft, so how many D go before the Canucks get to the podium with that 11th selection? And as much as Patrick Allvin talked up moving up last week, and I still think that there is a scenario where they could trade down, ultimately this team is bereft of high-end prospects, particularly in the back end. I think they're going to use the 11th pick. So Tom Lander is a guy that fits the bill on a lot of levels. I think Axel Sandin-Pellikka has been talked up as well, and I wouldn't be personally disappointed if he wound up in the Canucks stable. If there are one of those forwards that falls, and, I'm going to be really curious to sort of see where the breaks are in this draft, and Michkov is an absolute wild card. And, when you think of the depth that Anaheim has down the middle, could things go completely askew with the second pick? Would they dare take Michkov as high as number 2? I unlikely, but, I'm all for it in terms of introducing some chaos into all of this. But I think the Canucks, it's my understanding, they've got some real interest in Ryan Leonard if he was to drop that far down. And I know that they've been linked to Nate Danielson as well. And there's sort of that, not a high ceiling, but a guy that a lot of people think is just going to have a very productive, well-rounded National Hockey League career as a right shot centerman. And again, when you look at the wish list for the Vancouver Canucks, right D and a right shot center, I would think those two are at the very top of the list.
I do wonder if they reach for, well, first of all, Michkov, by the way, guys, the GM that drafts Michkov is a GM that has been appointed in the last 2 years, right? A guy that knows he's going to be around when Michkov eventually gets there. The Vancouver Canucks fit that bill. Whether or not he lasts till 11 remains to be seen, and I would doubt that. But, I think it has to be a GM who feels ultimately confident that he's going to see him in 3 years' time. I wonder if the Canucks are tempted to reach for Reinbacher. If Reinbacher's on the board still after 6 picks, 7 picks, because I think there's an outside chance that they think he might be able to play next year as a cost-efficient defenseman, big guy who's already played pro games. I wonder if they think that he's maybe an option for them next season, and they're tempted to reach for him if he's within arm's reach And even if it means kind of mortgaging the future a little bit by making that trade.
I hear you, and yet history just tells us it's so hard to trade into the top 10. Like, we always talk about that as one of those things, and so often teams are just reluctant. I think they're scared, obviously, to move off a top 10 pick. But for the reasons you laid out, yes, I think the Canucks would be interested if they could get the presumptive best defenseman in the draft when they started the week with the 11th overall pick. I think they'd be pretty happy about that, but at what price, I guess, is the question. And what assets ultimately do the Canucks have to move up? Would it be enough to package Nils Höglander with the 11th pick to move up 3 or 4 spots?
No,
I don't think so.
I think it's Lekaramaki and maybe something else on top of that. But Lekaramaki, I think, gets somebody talking for 2 spots.
I wonder about an Arthur Silovs, just with the helium that he's got coming off the World Championship as well. I mean, I wouldn't have thought he was a trade chip necessarily, but if you want to strike while the iron is hot, we know that goaltending is sort of voodoo, and it would take a team that absolutely thought that that was just a projection of what's possible for Silovs in the years ahead. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't think Höglander alone gets you that deal, so that it's a question of what else is in the cupboard, and we know that cupboard doesn't have an awful lot in it.
Nope.
Yeah, Silovs, Höglander, Podkolzin, who knows? Maybe this week, and as you say, maybe in a trade-up scenario. Jeff, do you think trading down and shedding a contract is completely off the board now?
I don't. I still think that the Canucks, again, if they go into this sort of, and honestly, after all the years of best player available, I sort of would applaud if they had decided that, this is the year, hell or high water, they're coming home with a right shot defenseman or a centerman. If they've got some guys that, and again, it's going to depend on the volatility ahead of them in the draft, but there's always that to some extent. Yeah, I think that 11th pick should be open. They should be listening to calls. I would assume Patrick Allvin is. I certainly haven't ruled it out, Matt. I would think that is, part of the playbook for the Vancouver Canucks if the deal, and look, going way back, like that idea of Chicago, the idea of the Blackhawks coveting the 11th overall pick, walking away with 1 and 11 in this year's draft as they try to speed their rebuild. And if they were willing to take on one of those hefty contracts, the Canucks clear out cap space, but they're guaranteed. The Canucks have to pick in the first round. Trading out of the first round, to me, an absolute non-starter. So whatever they do with that 11th pick, if it's trading back, they have to come out of this with a first. You can't go, as they just said. I mean, they didn't have first rounders in 2020 or 2021. You can't go 3 or 4 years without a first round pick. That would seem insane to me. So, but I'd be open to that conversation of dropping down, shedding a salary, and still being able to get a top 20 player in what is believed to be one of the best drafts, in recent memory.
And we've talked a lot about Nashville at 15, who has more picks than anybody and is obviously going into a rebuild with Barry Trotz. We've talked about Chicago at 19 and wanting to get a playmate, maybe even Andrew Crystal, the Lower Mainlander, to go play with Connor Bedard. But Buffalo at 13, they have 2 prime second-round picks. Detroit at 17, they have 3 picks consecutively in the second round, 41, 42. 43, even down to Seattle and Minnesota at 20 and 21, who have some draft capital and prospects also. So could go a lot of ways if they're moving down. We'll talk about this later in the week, but as it stands right now, do you expect the Canucks to be a player in free agency?
Yes. I think that they will find a left shot defenseman. At what price point?
Is that Orlov, Jeff? Do you think they'll go as high end as Orlov?
I don't think they can get on Orlov. We spent some time last week talking about Carson Soucy. I think that type of player, a guy who maybe has earned a higher opportunity with a team somewhere else. The danger there is that maybe Carson Soucy has been perfectly slotted as a third pairing guy with both Minnesota and Seattle, and you always run that risk, and we've seen that from the Canucks before, believing that a guy that's done something somewhere else can step in and play higher in the lineup. But Soucy's big, you're not overly physical, but doesn't shy away from contact, kills penalties, had 10 goals in Seattle in the expansion year of the Kraken, and we know that the Canucks don't get an awful lot of juice from the back end. They're not looking for another power play guy. You've got Hronek in now, so you're looking at a guy that really will mind the shop. So whether it's Carson Soucy or somebody like that, I think that's where they go in unrestricted free agency. And then, of course, how do you address that third line center? Do you have enough money left to spend? Or, that one to me feels like finding a player, and I don't think Ryan Johansen, even though he's a local kid, I don't think he was the fit kid. He's into his 30s now. Who am I to call him a kid? But they need somebody that can kill penalties. And Ryan Johansen has not done that in Nashville. And that's where I think, can you find a team that's trying to shed the salary of a player who can still play? And I think the Canucks have to be ready to pounce and pivot and just be nimble, around the draft. And even those first couple of days of free agency, if teams strike out and they're looking for sort of that second route to, filling out their roster, that's where the Canucks have to be ready to play ball. So, I think the wish list is pretty clear. It's a question of getting from here to there. So, I think they're going to spend in free agency. My hunch is that they'll target a defenseman as a free agent candidate and maybe try to address third-line center through some sort of trade.
The more I hear all this, guys, I hear three pieces that the Canucks kind of need, and just not enough cap space right now to make all that happen.
Well, Orlov would eat up pretty much all of OEL.
Yeah, and I think Carson Soucy is going to get bid up beyond what he's worth as well. Still affordable, but more than he should.
I think that's a huge pitfall, Soucy. Like, overpaying for third-pair defenseman is like a cardinal sin in the NHL.
But he's got some helium as a free agent. For sure. Just, it's going to be interesting. I mean, who knows how it plays out, but I feel like there's still cash for here, and creating more cap space would still be in order if they could, but we'll see if they can pull it off.
Yeah, and that's where I kind of think, and we do see this some years, we talk about it most years, but that sort of secondary market of the first wave of free agency, we recognize that this is not a strong free agent crop, and if teams miss the boat, all of a sudden, does 3 years of cost certainty under $5 million on a guy like Connor Garland, does that make him more interesting to a team?
July 10th. Yeah,
exactly. So I don't rule that out entirely, but that's, as you said, a little bit down the road, not in the next 7 or 8 days as we work our way through the draft and in the first couple of days of free agency.
Okay, Jeff, thanks for this. We've got a busy week ahead, and you'll be joining us at some point later in the week. And, of course, as always, as Canucks News breaks, thanks for this.
All right, guys. Thank you.
This Sekeres Price clip brought to you by Bodog. Make a play at Canada's choice for free casino games, sports odds, and poker strategies.